Why make art? This was actually the topic for the first episode of this podcast I ever made. And though it might be a good idea to go back and look at what I said a year ago when I put it together, I'm not going to do that. A quick look through the outline tells me that I took a very academic angle on things. And so, maybe this is a good topic to visit every year, to take a look at as I change, as the art community grows, and as I hopefully become wiser. We shall see about that last bit. Last time I looked at why a human might create, but I think a better place to come from for this question is, what benefits might you get from choosing to make art? And why do I make art? As a fellow human who may or may not have something in common with you, dear listener. So why is it a good idea, the best idea, in fact, for you to make art? My name is Zach, by the way, and if this sounds like your cup of tea, please consider subscribing. So why is it a good idea? Well, first off, I want to start with something that might be deceptively simple, which is the fact that it's fun. This might seem like a weak place to start, but hear me out for just a minute. The last few years have been rather unpredictable and tense in our world. It's not uncommon to see dramatic headlines and even to run into traumatic things in our day-to-day life. Life is hard. And though I hesitate to say that it is harder now than it has been at the average point in human history, I have no trouble simply stating life is very hard for many people right now. Art can be a knife to cut through the difficult times. It doesn't destroy them. I don't want to be overly dramatic in my description here. But it can cut them apart, displace them, and break them into more manageable pieces. For me, drawing and painting bring joy and happiness. It's productive to put lines and shapes upon a page, and when you are done, there is something there that would not have been there if you hadn't engaged in the activity. And again, art doesn't displace entirely the bad times. It doesn't deal with the traumas or the terrors that might be happening in your life, but it can be a momentary reprieve. And while some people might lean into the idea that it is dodging reality, that it is an escape, I don't think that that notion is entirely correct or productive, because we as humans are finite, fragile beings, and we need a reprieve here and there. In fact, without downtime, without relaxing, without proper rest, we are nearly incapable of doing anything worthwhile. If you want to be a good friend, a good spouse, a good partner, a good parent, you need time to rest your body, your mind, and your soul. And for a lot of us, especially those of you who are listening to this, art can be that rest. It can be the time to disengage from the other realities of life and to focus on something that is creative, productive, and innovative. Joy and happiness seem undervalued today in some senses. We hear a lot about hustle culture, a lot about making sure we are terribly efficient all of the time. Don't get me wrong, I love being efficient and I love simplifying, but both are pointless if the excess time is not applied in a meaningful way. What I mean is free up time, simplify, so that you can put time into things that you enjoy. Time into things that are productive, but not productive in a financial way necessarily, although your art could be, obviously. But that shouldn't be the point for most of us. For most of us, the art itself is the point. The joy, the satisfaction, the relaxation, the detachment from the things that give us pause. So allow yourself that joy. Allow yourself that time. If work is hard, raising kids is hard, the political landscape of your local area is hard, something as simple as putting together some cute drawings, a painting of a few flowers, can lift you out of the mire. Is it going to save you from that muck? No, but maybe, and it will inevitably make your life better in the meantime. So joy, I think, and fun are really, really good reasons why making art is still relevant today. Now, you may look at this and go, well, I'm 40 or 50 or 60 years old, and I've always kind of enjoyed tinkering with it, but I'm not going to be able to get to that level of proficiency as some of the younger folk or people who have been at it for 20 or 30 years. And you might be right, but you don't actually know, first of all. It might be one of those things that once you dive in, you realize that your life experience actually equips you to move more swiftly through those things than a lot of the younger folk. And the other side of that is that it doesn't really matter. If your art brings you joy, if it allows you to attach yourself to something innate in what it means to be human, then it doesn't really matter if you're better or worse than other people. Comparison is a thief of joy when it comes to art specifically. Another side of this, though, too, is that there are other people out there who are making things. And sometimes it's not just your individual selfish joy, but it's this joy in the community. We've built a Discord community here over the last couple months, and it's been wonderful for me personally and for a lot of other people as well, because there's now a small community where other artists just like us can share their artwork, can show other people the things that they're excited about, can show things that they're being inspired by, and then can also get help on the things that they're struggling with. Community around art is super important, but it's also this beautiful thing. Artists tend to be a little bit alienated, or at least live on the fringes of society in some capacities. And so having the ability to touch base with other artists, with other people like us, is such a wonderful thing. So if you want to check out that Discord community, there's going to be a link in the description down below. The next thing I want to touch on today is that art is an exploration of the world. It's tying the tangible and the intangible together with the dyed fibers of paper or canvas. Journaling is a lovely thing. I love the idea of it personally, but I'm bad at sticking to it. However, I have sketchbooks and artwork that chronicle portions of my entire adult life. Though that page might not be filled with an array of lovely and poetic words, it is covered in lines, in colors, and shapes that are indicative of where I was at the moment that I made them. Often when I go back over old drawings, I am transported to that moment, to the hotel in Iceland, to the quiet classroom I used to teach in, to the cold basement in the middle of summer. Some piece of me, of my soul, was thrown upon that page and now sits as a pylon for future me to look back upon. Sketchbooks in general are wonderful for this, but art, overarchingly, is this way. It is a chronicle of what you have done, and it is an exploration of the things that you are seeing in your world around you. I find that when I go back and look at my sketchbooks from middle or high school, I see glimpses of the video games, of the friends, of the books, of the TV shows and movies that I was imbibing of. I see sketches that go, maybe this is made by someone else. I ran into that a lot actually when I was going through some high school sketchbooks, chunks that I had to edit out for my sketchbook tours, because I would stumble upon a page and go, oh, that was so-and-so's drawing. And I don't know how I feel about including that drawing here. It's probably okay. The drawing was made by this friend 20 years ago, this person that I haven't talked to in ages. But I edited them out just because it felt like the kind and right thing to do. But it was interesting stumbling upon those. And conversely, I run into my own drawings that are influenced by those friends. More frequently, though, it's my drawings that are influenced by the anime that I was watching, or the movie that came out, Aliens vs. Predator, or The Lord of the Rings, or Firefly and Serenity, or Star Wars movies. Those kinds of things influence my artwork for weeks and for months after I watched them. And when I go back to my middle school sketchbooks, I see all of these drawings that are from the RTS games that I played in middle school. Command and Conquer, Total Annihilation, Warcraft, Starcraft, things like that. They breathed life into my artwork, and I get this just massive hit of nostalgia when I go back through those things. The other side of it, though, is not just the backward facing. It is the fact that in the moment when you're drawing, you are exploring the world around you. I've been doing lots of little studies on things recently. Different kinds of animals or landscapes, rocks, glaciers, ice, clouds, all kinds of just things that I'm pretty bad at drawing and I've been focusing on working on. When you do that, you are naturally analyzing the world around you. And I think that you gain this greater appreciation for the world that we live in. And regardless of where you're coming from religiously, it's a beautiful thing that we have this at our disposal, at our fingertips. we have been given this gift, whether it's by a god or by nature or the universe. We have been given this gift of this beautiful planet with all of these weird, bizarre animals that don't make any sense, like most of the animals that come from Australia. So if I have any Aussies who are listening, like, you guys have some very strange animals. But I'd also be curious to know if any of our animals in like the northern hemisphere seem really weird to you. So let me know in the comments below. But there are so many interesting things on this planet and landscapes that are so outlandish. You know, I work on writing fantasy books, and one of the things that I do when I try to come up with a new animal or creature or location is I just go look at our real world, because there's so many strange places on this planet that most people don't know about, because you have to have this weird brain that loves learning and continues to just delve into everything you don't know. And it's overwhelming. The amount of things that are on this planet to understand and to know about are truly overwhelming. But there are locations in the world called sky islands, and there are cloud forests, and there are deep canyons and trenches in the ocean that are just so inspiring in what they are. And when you engage in art, when you look up reference material, when you brainstorm things, you're building off of the world that you know, and you're learning more about the world that we all inhabit. And that exploration is a beautiful thing, and probably enough of a reason to engage in art just in and of itself. And I think that if you love science and biology and those kind of things, that art might be one of the best hobbies that you could ever take on. Because if you sit down and you fall in love with a caterpillar, I don't mean that in a weird way, but if you fall in love with insects and you are going to sit down and analyze them and put your professional time into those things, drawing them makes you far, far more aware of all of the intricacies of that thing. I think that any of you who've taken an art class, who've worked from reference before, if you sit down and draw a thing by looking at it and trying to transpose it from reality onto this two-dimensional fake surface that makes a representation of that thing, you cannot help but have a better understanding of the thing that you've been working on by the end of that process. So when you take the time to illustrate something in your life, to draw the forest you took a lunch break in, a prairie dog from your lunchtime walk, you look for different things. Not only do you notice different things, but you actually look for different things. When I see a dog, I see a creature that needs to be petted, because that's just the nature of the universe. But when I go to draw a dog, I'm thinking about bone and musculature and how things fit together. And I'm reminded of the fact that the joints in their forelimbs are really the same, if not incredibly similar to our arms. And so I can kind of think of myself in that form. Like, if I was to walk on all fours, how would my arms move? And the back legs work very, very similarly, though the knees are almost up inside the body of the animal. We don't see them nearly as much, and the ankles are really elongated. But when I look at an animal to draw it, I'm looking at it with different eyes. I'm trying to understand functionally like how it works, because that allows me to articulate things more accurately in my drawings. It allows me to take that thing and pose it differently and think about it in a way where I have a more true, a more functional sense of the thing. And I've found this benefit to be really true. And when I'm looking to represent things, I see things differently. I find different things in the world around me. You may have looked at your cat for the last 5 years, but I can almost guarantee you, if you sit down to draw that funny furry noodle critter, you will notice things about your beloved pet that you have never seen before. So regardless of where you are in life, I think that engaging in art allows you to investigate the things that you value and the things that you find beautiful. And in and of itself, that might be enough of a reason to justify making art. It also gets you in touch with your inner child and with a more childish nature in general. And I think this is a beautiful thing. I've talked about this a little bit recently, actually, in some of my sketchbook sessions. And the idea that we call things childish in a demeaning way, at least here in the United States. And I've come to think about this more recently because I have a 5-year-old daughter. And every once in a while, I find myself telling her, you know, you can't do that. Like, that's something that babies do, or that's something that is childish. And me being me, later on, I ruminate on that and I think about like, what is that communicating to her? That's communicating that being a baby or being a child is not okay. And yes, there's some semblance of, well, yeah, you're 5, like you shouldn't act like you're 2 anymore. But we use that term, childish, to mean something that should be left in the past, something that should be abandoned as you get older. And I don't think that that is necessarily a bad thing, but I think that it is a bad thing for us to use phrases like that without contemplating them. And so don't misunderstand me there. I'm not saying that all of these phrases and these things that we say to kids like that are necessarily bad. I'm just saying that I think that it's bad for us to use them without actually thinking through them. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because there are a lot of things that are childish in nature, things that we maybe look down upon or we just label as being childish, that are really wonderful and beautiful. The ability to innovate and come up with ideas with reckless abandon because you're not being judgmental of what you're doing. That's a wonderful thing. And if we can hold on to that into adulthood, we're actually like much better problem solvers. We're going to deal better with relationships. We're going to deal better in our jobs because we aren't so quick to judge an idea and then throw it in the trash. You know, little kids will try things that we know will fail. And maybe 90% of the time as adults we're right, but there is that 10% of the time where the kid does something and you go, didn't expect that to work. Every once in a while my daughter does stuff like that, and I try not to push her too much into a box when she says like, I'm gonna do this, and I'm like, that's not gonna work, honey. But you know, if she figures that out for herself, that's beneficial. And there's always a chance that I'm wrong. Like, just because I'm 37 years old doesn't mean that I know everything. It means presumably I know a lot more than my 5-year-old kid, and I think that's true. But it doesn't mean that I know a lot more about everything. She's seeing the world through like untainted eyes, eyes that are not jaded and calloused by trauma and a cruel world. And so she sees things differently. And so I think it's beneficial for us to think about that when we think about childishness, is untainted eyes. You know, a kid looks on the world with a sense of joy and exuberance generally. And that is something that we ought to try to reclaim. And art allows us often to get in touch with that side of ourselves. In some ways, it does it by literally being nostalgic, reminding us of easier times, of times where things were less stressful, times where things were better. And in some sense, I think it's just a more childish aspect of our souls, of our minds, to go back to this age when we would create things and we would innovate, when we would try new things. There's something innately playful about a lot of artwork. Yes, it is also work, and it is a skill that you're building, and it's hard sometimes. But I'm thinking about the drawing that I'm putting together in the background here. There's an element of this that is work, that is logical. I'm thinking through it. I'm trying to think about how the light is affecting things, how the storytelling is coming across. But especially right now, as I'm just blocking in large chunks of background black, it's kind of playing, you know? I'm just having fun. It's methodical, and I don't mind the repetition. It's kind of nice. It's a nice reprieve from the more stressful drawing portions of it. And honestly, if you think about the topic of the drawing, it's a giant robot in an underground city looking at another robot. Like, it's kind of silly. It's kind of goofy. It's kind of childish, if you want to call it that. And it's fun. And I think that that sometimes is enough of a reason. Engaging with childlike things is freeing, and we need that. I mentioned it earlier in the podcast that we need that reprieve sometimes. We are better versions of ourselves when we allow ourselves to relax. As children, we also don't compare ourselves to others as much. And that's something that if you're investing a lot of time into drawing, especially drawing goofy and silly and fun things, you're not comparing yourself to others nearly as much. It's easier to build that community. It's easier to spend time drawing alongside other people, with people in your community, and having fun and building those relationships and those friendships. If you have small children, I would encourage you to get back into drawing with an even more vehement, encouraging slant, because Kids aren't judging you for what you can and can't draw. It doesn't matter if you can't draw a hand. Like, they can't either. They're going to have fun doing it with you. And it's an exploration of those childish things and tendencies. You don't know if you haven't drawn in 20 years and you now have a small child. You don't know if there's going to be some special level of joy that is unlocked from engaging in those things, from trying it again. Maybe all you've tried when you were younger was drawing. Maybe you should try painting now. Kids love painting because it's messy and goofy and it feels like this special thing. And I would encourage you, especially if you're like me and you don't like messes, work on getting over it, because kids are messy and they enjoy that mess. And there's always a hose outside, right? You can always hose them off. If you don't have a hose outside, I guess you could always shove them in a shower. Definitely have brought my kid in and she's covered in chalk from drawing outside, like head to toe. And it's like, okay, we're going straight into the bath or straight into the shower. But she loves that. Those memories are good for her. And it's a bonding thing. We spend a lot of time drawing together. And I do think it puts me more in touch with my inner child, but it actually puts me in touch with my actual child too, which is a lovely, beautiful thing. The physical action of art can actually be good for you too, especially when it comes to 3D media, but with 2D like I'm working on here as well. We are beings of body, mind, and soul, and we need to use all three of them to actually be fulfilled in some way. Artwork often uses the mind and the soul in fairly distinct ways, but the act of moving your body to put marks upon a page is good for the unity of these three parts. Now, this might sound really ethereal, and I mention the soul a lot, and if that seems off-putting or strange to you, just think of the soul in the way that I'm talking about it as being not necessarily the logical component of your brain, but more of the emotional, conscience components of how you think and how you interact with the world. That's really what I'm talking about when it comes to this. Art usually utilizes like the logical components of your brain and then also the emotive components, because you're trying to tell a story or you're trying to elicit some kind of emotional reaction from people. And a lot of drawing like I'm working on here doesn't use a lot of my body. I've been working since I started doing Draw a Box a couple years ago on drawing more from my shoulder and from my elbow than doing all the drawing from my wrist. My line quality has improved dramatically, by the way. And if you haven't checked them out, I would highly recommend it, because they do have some good advice on basic things like that I think we all should work on. Ironically, I went through an art education process. I have 2 degrees in art, and that never came up at all. That like, hey, you probably should not only draw from your wrist. Like, A, it makes your line quality worse. B, it's going to screw up your joints and your bone structure later on. So please don't do that. But that's one of those things that I forget about, is art is physical. Even if you're working on digital art, like you're working on a tablet of some kind, you're still moving your body. And I think that there's a distinct benefit there. It's a lot better for you than sitting on the couch and just watching TV or playing a video game. There's something physical that is moving, even if it's slight, small things like you're watching here. But when I paint, I often stand. I have a standing desk that I'm recording at right now. But if you work on 3D art, metalsmithing, woodwork, sculpture, ceramics, oh my goodness, how good for your brain that is. Because you are engaging so much more of your totality as a human being. And it's a really, really good thing. So the physical aspects of art should not be left by the wayside when you're considering the benefits, because they exist, they're real, and they keep you young in a sense. I'm going to throw this out just real quick before I move on to the next section, but I think this also extends into other physical activities, like as general artist self-care. Highly recommend going for walks, highly recommend working out regularly, because we do have a tendency to sit down so much. Like, art is physical, and that's a really good benefit of it, but it's probably not for most of us physical enough. So I would highly encourage you to do other things. And again, like examining the world when you go out for a walk, like you are adding to your visual library. So we all need to get out and do a little bit more physical activity. And if you can do it outside, I think that is really the best thing that you can do. I just had to throw that in there because it's a huge benefit and something that often gets overlooked by artists, because if you're anything like me, you like staying inside and being cold and avoiding the sunlight because the brightness is overwhelming. But yeah, maybe you really love the sun. Let me know in the comments below if you love working in the sunlight and being outside all the time. I love being outside, but I really hate being in direct sunlight. Art is also therapeutic, though. And this is going to be a really powerful thing for a lot of people. It's a way to sort through things, whether it's trauma or just a bad day at work. This is one of those things that I didn't work with a lot in my youth. I had a pretty good childhood and I didn't grow up with a lot of trauma. And so for me, art was mostly an exploration of the world around me. And it was fun and enjoyable and it chronicled things. But I had a lot of friends, especially in high school, who worked through the hardships of their life through their artwork. In a lot of ways, their art is what saved them. I think some of them made it through high school and college only because they had art to fall back on. In some cases, it was the artistic community. In some cases, it was literally the art, the ability to make things. Art saves lives because it gives people an outlet. And in a lot of cases, it gives people a group to belong to. A lot of the people who work through their traumas with their art are people who feel like they are sectioned out from the rest of the populace, people who are different, others. And the art world is often very accepting of people that are just a little bit different than the norm in a particular culture. I know that I spent a lot of my high school time playing in punk and ska bands, and there was this massive overlap between the punk kids and the artist kids, because we both kind of felt like we were marginalized groups of people. And I mean, I wasn't, but there were a lot of people in those groups who were of different ethnicities, of different sexualities, of different backgrounds than any of the other kind of more normal groups. And again, this is like 20, 25 years ago. So a lot of the things that are more accepted now were not as accepted then. And yet the punk kids and the art kids and the anime kids all tended to be a little bit more accepting because they all in some capacity felt like they were a little bit of an outcast. So art can give you this community in that way. And that can be really therapeutic for some people. Some people find their people in that realm. And art is a beautiful thing in that capacity. It gives us the ability to work through ideas too, whether these are things that tie into hardships or just simply like you need to think something through. I found that a lot of my notes in high school and college were largely done with some amount of drawing or sketching. And in fact, one of the first things I put in my studio space here in the basement when I built it like a year ago was a large scale whiteboard. Why? Because I sort through most of my ideas visually in some way. Now, there's two ways that can go, at least two ways, I guess. You can actually sort through the things you're feeling and the ideas that you have by drawing out illustrations and pictures, or you can sort through ideas by literally drawing out webs of words and connecting things. I do a lot of that latter one, and I actually have done some in sketchbooks. In fact, in the last couple pages of this sketchbook, there are word maps working out like processes for coming up with ideas and solidifying a drawing and designing a project and things like that. I think visually in a lot of ways. And once I've seen it, then it kind of cements itself in my brain. I have it for a very, very long time, but I have to do that. And so for me, it's not necessarily to work through trauma, but it's to work through concepts and ideas. And art is a wonderful bastion for me in that way. But it gives a lot of people the ability to sort through ideas, to sort out things that are happening, to just take a mountain of thoughts and ideas and then to slowly sort them out into piles and to diminish anxiety by doing that, because now you can be more aware of all those things that sit upon that page. And that's a really beneficial thing. I found that for myself, when I'm anxious or stressed, if I can actually sort through like the things that are causing that and then put them into a note, put them into a list, it immediately starts to dissipate, because my brain is partially focusing on those things so much because they have to be thought about. They have to be considered. But once they're down somewhere, they've been prioritized. They've been set aside. My brain's like, oh, okay, like I can let that go now. It's on that note over there. It's on the calendar. It's on a meeting. It's saved. I'm okay, I can relax a little bit. And art can give you the ability to do those kind of things. Sometimes getting the things that trouble you onto the page can be really beneficial. You can extricate these things from yourself, the things that have been troubling you or you've been struggling with. If you can write them out in a journal, that's often great. I used to write songs about things. That's how I sorted through the emotional stuff that I was dealing with. But for a lot of people, it's art. It's drawing little comics, it's drawing little memes, it's drawing images of demons and the world breaking and all these things that allow you to get what you're feeling on the page. And when you pull those feelings out of yourself, when you extricate them from yourself, sometimes it can actually alleviate some of that feeling. And it's a really beautiful, really wonderful thing in that capacity. And sometimes art is an escape. It allows you to get away from the toughness of reality. You can escape to a healthier space, a space that you imagine. I think a lot of authors actually started off writing stories because of this reason. Either their life was bad or it was boring. And so they created these other realms to explore for their younger selves. I think a lot of the world building that I did in my youth was not necessarily to escape difficult times, but to escape boring times. I spent a lot of time in hospitals in my early years in high school because my grandparents were dying. And so instead of just sitting there and being bored or playing video games, I spent a lot of time drawing and a lot of time thinking about these stories. And even when I was playing video games or playing cards, I was thinking about world building things. I was chewing on them. It was an escape from the mundanity of that and also like the sadness of that situation. You know, spending a lot of time in a hospital is not particularly enjoyable. And I've spent a lot of time in hospitals over the years. I am happy to say that I have been blessed in a lot of ways, that it has very seldom been for my own issues, but it's hard in a different way when you're in the hospital for someone you love, taking care of them and keeping an eye on them. And especially when they're older people and you know they're not making it through this. And so world building and drawing and writing were escapes from that kind of situation, escapes into something that was happier, safer, healthier in a way. Okay, so why do I make art? And I do this focusing on myself, not because I feel like my perspective is special or perfect or should be a model one for you to follow. But I do it because you might identify with pieces of what I talk about. It might be relevant to you. And it feels like it's only fair. If I'm talking about all of these things and giving little snippets of advice from my time with students and my time on my own journey, it seems reasonable to give you insight into myself. And again, not because I'm special, but because it might be something that you identify with, or you might just be reminded that I'm not some floating head that's not even a floating head right now, a floating hand on the internet. I'm an actual human being who, you know, is very strange in some ways, but still just a human being. So for me, a lot of my art comes back to telling stories. And I think there's a couple aspects here that are interesting and unique. I think a lot of people want to tell stories because they feel like there's some massive theme that they want to get across. You know, there's something maybe that was really hard in their life and they want to tell a story that will bring some focus to that thing. I don't really have that. I don't really have something dramatically profound that I want to say, I don't think, through my artwork. I think that for me, it's more of the escape. I really enjoyed having that ability to dive into artificial worlds, whether it was art, video games, books, TV shows. Those kinds of things were an escape from mundanity, an escape from hospital time, like I mentioned earlier. And those are the things that I really, really enjoyed. So when I started building worlds, when I started drawing things specifically for my fantasy world or my sci-fi world or the weird post-apocalyptic robot one, like you're seeing right here, those were mostly stemming from, this is a really cool idea, I want to bring it to life. And the more that I've chewed on it over time, I've had this idea that each of these are unique and they're different and they explore different things. The fantasy novel that I finished my first draft of recently and the fantasy world associated with it that I play in is largely built off of my love for Tolkien. It's built off of this idea that having a fully fleshed out world and then only exposing the public to pieces of it makes it feel akin to our real world. That's a fascinating idea for me. It's this beautiful merger of art and history and design and anthropology and archaeology and this weird limited understanding that we in the present have of these past civilizations. Like, there are whole civilizations that have existed on the earth that we are totally aware of. Civilizations like Babylon or Ur that we know so little about. And the weird part is we continue to discover new civilizations. And it's very, very strange. We have really good records of some things, and we have really terrible records of other things. And sometimes, cities and races and people groups sit there in these stories and we're like, oh yeah, that's just a story. And then later on it's like, no, we actually think Troy did exist. It wasn't just a mythological thing that was in the Odyssey and the Iliad. And that's really intriguing to me. And so for me, the fantasy world was really an exploration of those things, an exploration of how little we know about our world. As I've chewed on it more and worked on it as an adult, I've thought a lot about themes. Is there something bigger that I'm trying to say? I think it kind of comes down to, good and evil exist, but usually it's not some divine evil that has screwed things up for humans. It's usually humans that have screwed things up for humans. And that miscommunication and the pursuit of power are often what destroy beauty. And that's kind of a working theme for the larger work. I'm starting to chew on it more intensely because right now it's much more of just like, this is a historical text and these are all the things that happen and here are some cool characters and cool things that happen. And maybe that'll be fine. But I'm trying to work out some of those other elements. Ironically, the story that I'm working on here, which is Amongst the Broken, with all the robots buried underneath Siberia in a weird post-apocalyptic alternate history that, where the Cold War actually, turned the world cold. This one's different. This started as a series of songs that I started writing, and the songs are dealing with a lot of my struggles with things, struggles with finding purpose in life, struggles with feeling like I was broken and upset about the fact that I have, some disabilities and some things that I am faulty in physically and maybe mentally too, and the more I go back and listen to those things, like I have these emotional resonance points because there was a lot there. And I think I was just sorting through a lot of stuff at that moment. And so that story will probably be one that I focus on earlier artistically, because I think that it might be more beneficial for a lot of other people. At the crux of it all, I work on my art because it brings me joy. And it brings me joy partially to just have a finished product and a cool or cute thing. But it's also like these stories that I get to talk about here and with other people. And we are a storytelling race. Like, humans are storytellers. It's how we've gotten pretty much everything across since the dawn of time. All of the giant historical and biblical texts seem to have predominantly been handed down orally as stories for most of human history. We use fables and mythology and all kinds of things to walk people through the choices that they should or shouldn't make in life. We do all of that via story. And so it seems only rational to me that a huge focus for art would be to tell stories. And sometimes those stories have huge, massive moral and ethical conundrums, and sometimes they're just fun. And I think for me, it's the storytelling that is so important. And I also just like continuing to improve and get better. It's fun to get to the point where I can do a thing that I couldn't do earlier. I'm a much better drawer than I was 5 years ago. I've accelerated massively in this robot series, just working on 100 of them and dedicating myself to do them. And that's really encouraging. And we all need some of that encouragement. Well, as always, thank you for listening. I appreciate your time, especially on things like this, where this is almost like an anniversary episode of the first podcast that I did. It would make more sense maybe to do this as like a 100th episode or something, but I think I'm just gonna set something in my calendar and I'll come back once a year and talk about why you should make art and then why I make art in the moment. And maybe it'll change. It'll be really intriguing to go back and listen to some of these old ones if I ever decide to, about why I make things and why I think you should make things too. Again, the links for the Discord community are in the description down below if you'd like to check it out. It has been a wonderful little advent here in the last couple months, and it is just a loving community of people all working on getting better. And so there's people there that can give you feedback on your work, but there's also just people that will lovingly look at the things that you're excited about and be excited about the things that you're excited about. I would also like to thank patrons Who, What, Where, When, and Pale Spider for your continued support. I really appreciate it. And if you are looking to support the channel, you can check out the Patreon link below. It gives you access to some inside features as well as outlines and scripts of things ahead of time, and also the ability to guide some of the content that I talk about here on the podcasts and in the sketchbook sessions. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.